Okay. So how did I get into this? When I was about 19, 18, 19, a buddy of mine, Mike, and we started getting into more vintage stuff. And I remember buying my first pair of like old vintage Wranglers that I wore the shit out of. And that's kind of what got us into this. Starting in, I think, 2000 ish, a buddy of mine started a company called Lifetime. So we were around people that were doing more clothing stuff. And then again, my same friend Mike and we had actually talked about starting a denim brand in the early 2000s. We were going to call it Mr. Clark. And him and I just both got really busy. I kind of got more into the professional snowboarding, and he went and did art direction for a lot of really big companies. And so we just kind of split. And, from there, you got into like a lot of the raw stuff that was happening around like 2003. I don't know what year Naked and Famous came around, but I remember like there was Naked and Famous and Nudie, and there was a handful of other brands, and I could never find like the Naked and Famous or Nudies that fit. And I remember ending up in a pair of APCs at one point in time. I had some really like slim fitting denim. I can't remember what those were called. There was also another organic denim, selvage denim that I got really into. But that was kind of the start of it. And then, I got out of a lot of that just because snowboarding really took over my life. And through snowboarding, I actually got to do quite a bit of design. Actually, my first pair of Japanese denim, I remember I got on my first trip to Japan, which was 2001. And I remember soaking them, and there was just so much indigo that came out of them, and it was so crazy. But through snowboarding, I got to do actually a lot of design. So that's where a lot of what I do now kind of fits into what I did then, kind of transferred over, just designing like snowboard gear, jackets and pants and things like that. I remember seeing my first Ironheart jeans at a motorcycle shop in Japan. And I think they were just really heavy denim. I wish I would have bought them because that would have been awesome to still have those. I remember putting them on and just being like, what the fuck? These are crazy. And then as for how the shop started, growing up, I always thought I would own more of a skateboard shop. But just as I got older and my interest sort of in skateboarding and snowboarding sort of fell to the back burner, this idea kind of started brewing. I was getting more into motorcycle stuff, and I actually had a meeting, or not a meeting, I had a lunch with a buddy of mine, and we talked about doing something like this. He owned a retail store that sold bikes at the time. Ultimately, he was like, I don't ever want to do retail. And I had mentioned it in passing in around 2010 to his wife's friend. And then one day randomly in 2012, he was buying some motorcycle parts off me, and he was like, hey, like, do you think you'd actually really want to do what you were talking about? And I was like, yeah, I have some money saved up. I think it would be really cool. And he was like, well, I found a space. And from that, he was just like, do you want to do it? And I was like, well, let me think about it. And he was like, well, we need to jump on this. Like, if you want to do it, the space is there right now, and we're going to lose it if we don't kind of hop on it. And so we just hopped on it, and the shop sort of started. We started out with a couple of brands, like a couple of my friends' brands, but also in the selvage range, we were doing like the LVC Levi's stuff. We were doing Tellison denim. We did Filson denim. And then we also did Eat Dust. So those, oh, and we also did Edwin. So those were our first few brands that we started with. And then just as business goes, you kind of end up doing this, and we lost our way for a little while. And then in 2015, I was on a motorcycle trip to Brooklyn, and I just kind of had this epiphany of like the direction the shop was going. I just really didn't like it. And when I came back, I just really wanted to make a lot of changes and go back to kind of the original idea of what I thought it was going to do, of just like better quality, fair wage made stuff, smaller batch, just good shit, rather than kind of your average typical skateboard shop type stuff. And then the shop started kind of forming into what we are now. So around 2015 was kind of when things really switched back to what we're doing now. And now we're in 2025, which is 10 years later, full 13 years after we sort of started the shop. Started talking about it in, I think, April. A couple days later, I incorporated, quit my job in June, and we opened in September. And so that's kind of how I got into this, or when I got into this, and then how the shop started.